An SABC News presentation.
Welcome to Interface here on SABC3. My name is Tembi Samachele, and tonight we're in conversation with the Reverend Frank Chikane about his latest book. It's called The Things That Could Not Be Said, From AIDS to Zimbabwe, or From A to Z. And there's a whole lot that we would like him to say tonight here on Interface, but we also would like you to participate as per usual. Our SMS line is 33726, and our Facebook page, you can find us by just finding Interface on SABC3. Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us on the show tonight.
Thank you very much.
I just want to open with a quote from a writer called Sabelo Ndlangisa, which I thought encapsulated what we're going to talk about today. And he says, there are very few issues that seem to split public opinion down the middle in South Africa than former President Thabo Mbeki's political legacy. Now, in you writing these books, first 8 days in September and now The Things That Could Not Be Said, are you perhaps in some way trying to change the way that history will remember President Mbeki?
Well, the books are really not about President Mbeki per se. They are about issues that are related to what happened in government when I was there. The first book, for instance, it's about his removal. It's not about him, but it's about his removal.
Well, semantics.
Yeah, it is, yeah. And the things that could not be said are the things that we dealt with in government during my time. The truth, of course, is that most of the time I was in government, I spent more time with Mbeki. And therefore, whatever I did would refer to what Mbeki was doing, because we did it together. But this is not about rewriting history. It is writing the real history, because I don't think this country got to know exactly what happened. And those of us who were directly involved needed to write about these experiences, and that's what I've done. So these are my experiences whilst I was in government. Yeah.
In the book, you talk a lot about the things that went wrong, and yet you also talk about the need to have a critical mass of comrades and cadres that will stand up for the truth.
Yeah.
And yet there you were for 13 years in the midst of all the things that were going wrong, saying nothing about them going wrong at the time.
Well, it depends on what you mean. Remember, if you are a public servant, you can't engage politically about the particular party political positions, differences between parties. You can't express your opinion about that, because I was not playing a political role. I was not a politically elected office bearer. I was a civil servant. In fact, I couldn't be able to write the things I've written whilst I was in the public service. And so that's why I say my service for 13 and a half years silenced me, in fact. And it's only when I've left that I can express myself about what happened there. So I wasn't quiet. I dealt with the issues within, but I couldn't deal with them publicly. I also was part of the National Executive Committee of the ANC
Which
for 10 years.
Which is what I was going to get to, that, you know, could you not have raised those issues?
I raised those issues within the National Executive Committee, but I couldn't raise them outside.
In the public space.
Because then I would be violating the law. In fact, you know, my colleague Joel Nechitenza, I always talk about him. He tried to take it to the margins, and he was charged as a public servant, but you can't express an opinion about a party if you are a public servant. You can only talk about policy of government, which I did very well when I was in government. And so I feel that being in government as a civil servant, there's a role you play. Indeed, I played a very important role, but it robs you of your freedom. Okay. That's why I felt now I have the freedom to express myself. Some people say, but you talk when you've already left government. I say, of course, I couldn't talk whilst I was in government. And that's why I resisted becoming a public servant at the beginning. It required lots of persuasion, including Mr. Mandela, putting a call to University of Cape Town, talk to the Vice Chancellor to release me to come here. I didn't want to.
I see this. And the world that you depict in these books
Yeah.
is one that is very dishonest, very
Yeah.
cutthroat,
Yeah.
lots of lies, and one where one would even say a man of the cloth like
Yeah.
yourself would even be corrupted.
Yeah.
Were you?
No, it is possible that people could be corrupted. I refuse to be corrupted. I mean, I took my position and I've maintained my line very clear. I shall not be corrupted, and I stand for the poor and those who need justice. We fought for justice in this country, sacrificed people's lives. I made great sacrifices for our freedom. I wasn't going to mess up with that freedom once we are free. And that's why I've refused, because corruption robs the poor. It doesn't rob the rich. Corrupt people take money that's supposed to go to the poor.
But some would say
Yeah.
your administration was also just as corrupt as the current one, or any other one for that
No,
matter.
I'm not making comparisons. Remember, if you read my book, it gives you a clear picture that within 2 years I arrived in government. I wrote a letter to Mr. Mandela and Mr. Mbeki and said the old is corrupting the new. So I picked it up right from the beginning. I'm not
And
doing
did what
comparisons.
about it, though?
That's why I put the letter through. I met with Mr. Mbeki. I expressed my concerns about it. And then they said, and I explained in the book,
Yes.
they then said they were going to deal with it within the party and within government. That's why you had, this list of legislation that came out about dealing with corruption. But corruption happens even when the legislation is there. Then you need the security forces, you need the police, you need the intelligence services to deal with corrupt people. But then if that system also gets corrupted, then you need, prosecutors, you need judges. And the risk is that corruption could reach a stage where it also affects prosecutors, it affects the police. And when it reaches that stage, then the country's in trouble. Fortunately, it's not the critical mass of that which is happening, by the way. It's a few people who are involved in these activities.
But you maintain that during your time in government, you did whatever you could have done
I
within
did whatever.
that framework.
Yeah, within
Okay.
that framework. And I did my best.
Okay.
And everybody I worked with know that.
Okay.
That I was dead against corruption, because besides learning it from school, research shows that corruption impacts more negatively on the poor than the rich.
Sure.
Yeah.
What about the timing of these books? You had 8 days in September coming
Yeah.
up before the elective conference
Yeah.
in Mangaung, and then you've got this book. It's ahead of the election, the elections next year. So I'm saying
There's
you've got an
no right
agenda
time.
here.
No, there's no right time. Which time is right? There's always politics all the time. I left government and I had informed all the presidents. Fortunately or unfortunately, I went through 3 presidents. When I was prepared to leave, it was still Mbeki. And I said, I'm going to write. I need help from the government to get information. And then he was removed. I was with President Motlanthe, and I said the same. He said, yes, we'll help you. And then he left. But during the elections, after the elections, and as President Zuma came in, and I also said the same. So all of them knew when I leave government, I'm going to write, which I did. And then when I had to publish the book, gave it to the publisher, they then recommended that you've got 2 stories in one book. I had 17 chapters already. So we broke it into 2, dealt with the 8 days as a separate book, and then rewrote the second part of it as things that could not be said.
Because
And
I
they
agree
came-
with those that say 8 days in September feels like
Yeah.
a book within the things that could not have been said.
Yeah, no. It was one book at the beginning, but the publishers thought it's actually two different books. The first one is like a story. You're telling a story. The second one is about policy issues you had to grapple with. And so the timing, it wouldn't matter when you publish it. I really have nothing to, these books have nothing to do with what's happening in the party or what's happening in the nation. It's about history.
Okay.
It's what happened in the past which concerns me.
Okay.
And therefore I felt it's important to write about it.
I'd love to hear what kind of reaction you've been getting, particularly from the African National Congress on this book. And also, I'd like us to talk about AIDS and also Zimbabwe and all the other issues that you raise in the book, as much as we can cover in the time that we have. But we have to take a short break. Remember, you can join in this discussion by SMSing us your comments to 33726, or also logging onto our Facebook page. It's Interface on SABC3. Stay with us. And we're talking to Reverend Frank Chikane about his latest book. It's called The Things That Could Not Be Said. And we touched a bit on corruption in the earlier segment. But, you know, what do you say to those people that say you are really bashing the current government, you are bashing the ANC, you are going against what you should be standing for as an ANC member?
No, this is not, these books are not against the ANC, and these books are not against government. These books are against particular behavior of people in government and corruption or corrupting, people who are corrupted or are corrupting the party or the ANC. That's what I'm against. I'm against those who are trying to destroy the people's movement and also try to negate what the government should do for the poor, which is what we fought for. And I would really take a stand for my life until, you know, the last breath to say you can't corrupt the people's movement and you can't corrupt government, because when you do so, we lose what people died for. And people died here. People sacrificed their lives.
Reverend, here? What's the solution? The current efforts to fight corruption, do you think that that's the way we should be going? Or is there something else we should be doing to fight this?
I don't think it's sufficient. There are laws. I mean, there are laws that have been put up. There are campaigns that are there. But people go and make a public statement against corruption and go and just do the opposite. Everybody knows that. I think what we need in this country, it's a critical mass that will make sure that the corrupt will know their days are numbered. I think that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that there is no fear. Now people are scared to talk.
Yeah.
People are scared they will lose their jobs. They are scared they won't get tenders. They are scared they will not be able to make money. They won't be able to take care of their children. You know, I've heard people saying that. When you are in corners, they tell you the story.
And I wish
But
we
when
had
you
more
say,
time to
"Can
look
we?"
into that,
Yeah.
because it sounds great as a slogan.
Yeah.
And you know, if we had time, I would like you to just go into what we would need to do on a practical level to make sure that we get rid of that kind of atmosphere of fear. But I'd like us to get to the issue of AIDS, because that was a very big issue of your administration in particular, the administration you were a part of. And you go to great lengths in the book to describe former President Mbeki as a researcher and intellectual who wanted to cover all his bases on the issue of AIDS. And, you know, it all feels as though he was just highly misunderstood. But there were a lot of people that died as a result of all of that delay during that administration. Do you think that he could have and should have done things better?
Well, I think the problem is that he still maintains his position. He believes in what he did. He believes in the way in which he approached this matter.
Do you believe in what he did?
Well, that's a different question. That's why the book, it's about that experience. And I do express my views in terms of how we turned it around. You will remember that there are three chapters in this book. One is about drugs and prices of drugs. The second, it's Mbeki and the controversy. The third, it's when we realize this thing is going to damage the country, it's going to affect the people, and it was a risk for him, actually. I mean, his life was getting at risk. And we said, no, we need to turn it around. You have made your point. You believe in what you believe in. And we believe that it is important to put up a policy of government. And from that day on, he then maintained the policy of government.
But I'm asking you this question, Reverend. Do you think that he should have acted earlier? Do you think he should have done things differently or better?
You know, Madam, that's a very difficult question. Remember, this period was short. It wasn't long. They remember
hindsight.
that.
Tell us,
hindsight.
with the benefit of hindsight, should he have done things differently?
No, on hindsight, you would say, as a president, he was bound to be misunderstood. As an intellectual, as a lecturer, as a professor, I'm sure you would have the right to do whatever he did and argue the case he made. And some of the issues he argues were valid arguments. And so you would say you made your point, but you didn't have to delay this process, because we then said You don't want to take responsibility for deaths of people, because whichever way people died, whichever way, you don't want to take responsibility. So let's put the responsibility to the people who make the choice. That's the solution we put up. Let people make a choice whether or not they want these drugs, having been informed about their toxicity, so that the people take the risk.
So
if
bottom
they get
line,
affected,
you feel that he did take too long?
Well, I can't say too long. I said
he should have acted sooner.
I can't say that either.
What can you say?
You see, the point I'm making is that when you are in the heat of things, you understand them as they unfold until you reach a stage where you say, Mr. President, you've made your point. We have studied what you are saying. We understand what you are saying, but we need to change course.
Quick one, same line of thought. I'm not convinced, Reverend, but we don't have the time. Zimbabwe is another issue. Here you've got the Mbeki government taking so long to intervene with the quiet diplomacy, and that eventually by the time you had the power sharing agreement in 2008, some say Zimbabwe had collapsed. And had your administration or that government acted sooner, Zimbabwe would probably not have gotten to that stage.
No, you see, Zimbabwe, it's an easier matter than HIV and AIDS. That's an easier matter. No, I don't think in Zimbabwe you could have dealt with it differently. You see, there are only two ways to deal with it. Either you decided as a country you're going to take a side and attack whoever you think is wrong, in which case you would cease to be a facilitator. You can't mediate. You see, people think you can mediate and bash people at the same time. It doesn't work like that. Only Americans do that because they use stick and carrot. Because they've got power, they can force you to get out of power if you don't behave. In our case, we worked on the basis of the SADC mandate. And the SADC mandate was facilitate dialogue between the parties to reach an agreement. But they must reach an agreement, which they did.
I'm pressed for time. We have to take a break, but I do want us to revisit this issue because, the question is, could you have facilitated or done things a little bit faster before that country collapsed? But let's take that question right after this break and also touch on your Facebook messages. We're back after this. So many issues still to touch on with Reverend Frank Chikane. So little time. Just a quick eye on some of your Facebook messages. Bumi Mali says, why is Reverend Chikane only glorifying Mr. Mbeki and not telling us his flaws or his bad side? Even though he tries so much to downplay his admiration of Mbeki, he repeatedly emphasizes that this book is not about Mbeki, but about his time in government. That admiration still comes through. Meli Moyo says, how do you classify a born free? What are their needs? How different are they from other generations? Obviously picking up on something that's raised in the book. And Murwashi Josh says, Reverend Chikane, don't you think South Africa should have a stricter border control to protect job opportunities for South Africans and to prevent xenophobia? Lots and lots of messages coming through for you. We don't have the time to address each and every one of them. But just quickly, let's just get back to that issue of Zimbabwe and you saying that, it could not have been done differently.
No.
Considering, and I say to you again, with the benefit of hindsight, considering just how much time was taken with that quiet diplomacy, very little being said, can you not sit back and say something could have been done differently here?
No, you can't say that because it means you would have forced the Zimbabweans to do what they don't want to do. The parties which were negotiating took their time. They were, in fact, more slower than we thought as facilitators. We thought we'd resolve this matter quicker, but they had issues amongst themselves, and we had to assist them to do it. As I'm saying, we were not there to go and tell them what to do. We're not going to use force to force them to agree, and therefore we respect the people of Zimbabwe. They are proud people who believe that they know what they are supposed to be doing. So we assisted them to do what they would want to do. So the global political agreement, it actually achieves that purpose. That's why now you're working towards an election. You've gone through a referendum.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
The issue of Pacifico, you say
Yes.
that he was fired to avoid a shootout between the police and the Scorpions at the time.
Yeah.
He says that...
No, the Scorpions and the police, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he says in reaction that the chapter about him in your book is full of factual inaccuracies and untruths told over a long period of time in the hope that they might become true. Lovely quote. But what's your reaction?
Well, I think he said he's going to publish his book. I think he has got the right to express his views about what is true and what is not true. What I've reflected here is exactly the truth. And I know most of the things I'm saying are not the popular things. But I'm saying the critical issue was not about Celebi in this matter. The critical issue was to make sure there's no instability in this country. And the president of the country has a responsibility. So if the National Director for Prosecution wants to exercise his right to prosecute somebody and there is resistance, you need the Commander-in-Chief to assist you to deal with that. And the president is the only one who can do it. I think that's the issue. It's not the issue about about Celebi and Piccoli. And my book, I've been very careful in that chapter not to pass judgment even on Piccoli. I am saying that they wanted to go and raid an intelligence headquarters. And if you did it, you would actually end up with difficulties.
Reverend Chikane, I would have wanted us to touch on the land question, media freedom, and all sorts of other different things. But just referring to one of the SMSs talking about how you're glorifying President Mbeki, are you guilty of hero worship here?
No, I don't worship human beings, not even in terms of my faith. And I'm not a hero worshipping Mbeki. I recognize who he is. I think it's unfair if you've got one problem about a person, you then disregard everything about that person. My point is he led the country very well. You could raise issues about HIV and AIDS. He had strong opinions. We found a way to turn it around, and we presented the best policy that the world recognizes on HIV and AIDS, which is the policy that we are using at the present moment.
We've got to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming through to talk to us.
Thank you very much, but the time is short.
It is short. We should have had an hour. Thank you so much for making the time to join us here on Interface. Good night.